The sterile scent of industrial soap and old tile clung to the walls of the courtroom restroom. I stood at the sink, my hands wet, sleeves rolled up, wiping away the last remnants of the janitor's work long after he had finished. The room was empty, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. A thin trail of water stretched across the smooth surface. Hearings, paperwork, and the steady rhythm of order and discussion had consumed the entire morning. But in this brief moment, I allowed myself a second to breathe. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. The condescending tone was unmistakable. "Did you leave law school to work as a janitor?" I didn't have to turn around to recognize Eric. His voice was as sharp and smug as ever, dripping with that same arrogance he had always wielded like a weapon. He thrived on belittling others, especially me. Slowly, I turned. He stood in the doorway, hands in the pockets of his well-tailored suit, shoes just barely polished. His fingers brushed the weathered tile as if even the walls were beneath him. He looked exactly the same, confident, untouchable. He wore that same smug grin, the one that always made my blood boil. I glanced down at the rag in my hands, the damp imprint it left on my palm. He thought this was his moment of triumph. Silence stretched between us, his grin widening as he waited. Waited for me to stammer, to explain, to justify. But I didn't. Instead, I folded the rag with deliberate care, set it on the sink's edge, adjusted my tie, and ran my fingers over the smooth fabric of my jacket. The weight of power was woven into every stitch. Only then did I meet his gaze. Eric's grin faltered. His confidence wavered. His eyes flickered downward, to the gold-plated insignia pinned to my chest. The weight of my title. Silence filled the space between us. For years, he had mocked me, dismissed me, reduced me to a footnote in his own flawless narrative. And now, he stood there, jaw tight, composure cracking, struggling to reconcile the failure he had once ridiculed with the man standing before him. It was poetic, really. You're the judge? I let the question hang in the air. Let him sit with his own disbelief. Then finally I nodded. Yes, Eric. I'm the judge. He looked like he wanted to say something, to hurl an insult, to reclaim even the smallest sliver of his shattered confidence. But no words came. He simply stood there, frozen. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to smirk. This moment spoke for itself. Eric shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat, trying to force himself back into that familiar performance. But it wasn't the same. The cracks were showing. He let out a forced laugh. You really worked your way up, huh? It wasn't a joke. It was a nervous exhale. I met his gaze evenly. For the first time, Eric didn't know how to react. He had come expecting humiliation, expecting to revel in my downfall. Instead, he had walked straight into something he never saw coming. I turned away, grabbing the folder I had set on the counter earlier. My afternoon docket was full. Cases, people, lives that needed my attention. Things far more important than Eric's wounded pride. As I passed him, I paused just long enough to glance his way. Have a good day, Eric. I have a hearing to attend. I walked out, feeling his gaze burn into my back. But it didn't matter, because for the first time, Eric saw me for who I truly was. Not a failure. Not a man beaten by life. But the very thing he had spent years convincing me I could never become. And that was justice. People like Eric think the game is over once they've won. They never stop to consider what happens when the man they tried to destroy comes back. Stronger, smarter, and ready to reclaim everything. Life has a way of leading you to places you never imagined. For years, I believed I had sacrificed everything. My future, my love, my dreams, all for my family. I told myself it was temporary, that it was the right thing to do. But sacrifice doesn't reward you. It doesn't praise you. It just takes. Until one day, you stop recognizing the person staring back at you. And then, if you're lucky, if you fight, you find your way back. I thought I would find my way back once my mother was secure and my brothers were independent. But life doesn't wait for you. The medical expenses kept piling up, and my mother's therapies were costly. My brothers still needed support. I took any job I could find: delivery, construction, warehouse work. Anything that paid enough to keep my family afloat. Meanwhile, my debt kept growing. One by one, my old peers graduated, passed the bar, and became lawyers. But I was stuck. The hardest part of survival wasn't the labor itself, it was the humiliation. I saw it in people's eyes, the silent sympathy, the nods that said, "What a waste," when they realized I had dropped out. Then came the whispers. He was meant to be someone important, but I guess some people just can't make it. I could ignore the outsiders, but seeing Olivia's name in legal circles stung. Eric was right there with her, thriving in the world I had once dreamed of. The worst part, I couldn't even be angry at them. I had let it happen. I used to believe life didn't give second chances. But everything changed one night, not through some grand epiphany, but sheer exhaustion. After another grueling shift, my feet ached from working security at a construction site all day, and my hands were raw from my second job at a shabby nightclub. I barely had time to eat or sleep, and each paycheck vanished before I could even hold it. That night, in a cracked break room mirror, I caught my reflection. I didn't recognize myself. My eyes were sunken, my face hollow. I looked 20 years older than I was. I saw a man who had given up, and something inside me rebelled. I had sacrificed too much to let this be my ending. I started small. During my short breaks, I pulled out my old law books and borrowed legal texts. I listened to case studies and lectures while working shifts. The game had been on for years, but the fire inside me never died. I had to prove to the world, and to myself, that I wasn't finished yet. But ambition alone wasn't enough. Then life threw me a lifeline. My mother remarried a man named Dr. Harris. Unlike my father, he was stable, caring, and well off. He took my brothers under his wing, paying for their education, something I could never have afforded. Then one night, he turned to me and said, "You've sacrificed everything for them. Now it's time to do something for yourself." I refused at first. I told myself it was too late, that I was too far behind. But Dr. Harris didn't just offer financial support. He believed in me. And sometimes that's all it takes. With his help, I returned to law school. But I wasn't the same person who had walked those halls years ago. I had lost everything and fought to regain it, and that made my return a different kind of battle. Some professors were surprised to see me. Others doubted I would last. But they didn't know what I had been through. They didn't know I had already faced the worst life had to offer. I had nothing left to lose. So I worked harder than ever before. I wasn't just trying to pass. I was trying to dominate. I analyzed every case, studied every precedent, and stayed up until dawn preparing for each class. I won debates, aced exams, and gradually proved myself to the very professors who once thought I was a lost cause. The moment I passed the bar exam on my first try, I knew it wasn't over. Leaving law school had been the hardest decision of my life. Coming back was an entirely different struggle. I wasn't just chasing a dream. I was fighting for justice, for my family, and for myself. Most of my classmates were fresh out of college, eager and excited about their futures. They had knowledge, but I had experience. I had lived through failure, through missed chances, through the pain of watching others move forward while I was left behind. And I had no intention of reliving that feeling. So I approached law school like a battlefield. I was always the first in the library and the last to leave. My professors pushed me harder because they saw I could take it. And soon, my name was once again being whispered through the hallways, except this time, it wasn't in pity. This time, they came to me for advice.